Hello, bonjour, bienvenue, and welcome. In this video, I'll make a brief introduction to logic functions. So this class of functions directs Excel to evaluate data and to modify the content of a cell depending on the result returned from the evaluation. As you become more familiar with logic functions, you can use Excel to make routine decision-based output on large data sets, saving yourself a lot of time and avoiding human error. So to illustrate several of these functions, let's consider a data range of fictitious student enrollment data, as we've done in several other videos. For today's module, I've already frozen the panes to keep student ID in column A and the data range headers in row 1 always visible. I also added a gray column S just to visually separate the analyses that I'm going to do from the data range itself. First, let's look at how to use one of the most powerful logic functions known as an if statement. So in cell T1, I'm going to add a header just to show what I want to do. Namely, in this case, I want to identify every student record for which the GPA is greater than or equal to 8. Now, in cell T2, I'm going to add a formula to check if the cumulative GPA for that record in column K is greater than or equal to 8. So I type equals to indicate that a formula is going to follow, the function if, and I indicate K2 as being greater than or equal to 8 as the logical test. And if that logical test is true, then I want to fill the cell with the value yes. And if that logical test is not true, I want to fill the cell with the value no. Now we want to fill the entire column with this formula, leaving the reference relative so the row number increases as we copy down. So you'll note that we can't double click to fill this column as we've done before because there's nothing in the column to the left. So Excel doesn't know how far down to copy. But we can simply select the lower right hand corner and drag it down all the way to the bottom of the data range. So now we see which records have a GPA of greater than 8. Now in cell U1, I'm going to type Women's Award. Let's double click column U to adjust to that width. Now in cell U2, I want to type a formula that evaluates whether the student has a GPA over 8 and if they are female. So I type if, and then to indicate a logical evaluation where both conditions must be met, I add the function AND. The AND function is now nested within the if function. So to complete the AND function, I list both conditions. First, the GPA must be greater than 8. So K2 is greater than or equal to 8, comma. Second, the sex indicated in column N must be F for female. The way an AND statement works, both of these conditions must be met in order for it to return the result of true to the if function. So if these conditions are met, we want to write eligible in the cell. And if these conditions are not met, not eligible. Now we can double click this cell to fill the column because the column to the left already defines how far down to copy. Now in cell V1, I'm going to make up a different fictitious scholarship. I'm going to call this one a Canadian scholarship. Double-clicking the letter V to adjust the column width. Now in cell V2, I'm going to type a formula that will evaluate whether the student has a GPA greater than 8 and if they are either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. So I begin with my if statement. Then I type and to show that there are multiple criteria. The first one is the usual, K2 greater than or equal to 8. And the next criterion involves an or statement. In this statement, I can indicate a number of conditions, any one of which can be satisfied in order to satisfy the condition as true. So in this case, P2 can either equal citizen or P2 can equal permanent resident. I close the nested OR statement with one closed bracket and the nested AND statement with another closed bracket. That completes the logical test part of the overall if function, leaving me to finish by providing the output if these conditions are true, namely the word eligible, and the output if these conditions are not true, namely not eligible. And I can complete the column by double-clicking. Now let me show you how to use the not function. Let's say there's a scholarship available for local students as long as they're not registered in the arts. And now that I say this example out loud, it sounds really cruel, but it's just a fictitious scenario, so don't get upset with me. So in my if function, I'm going to use AND to indicate there are several criteria. One is that the GPA in column K2 is greater than or equal to 8. The other is that the student is local as indicated in column Q. And the third, the controversial one, is that the academic group indicated in column L is not arts. So to describe this criterion, I type not L2 equals arts. I use a bracket to close the not statement, a bracket to close the and statement, and now I provide the output if the conditions are met and the output if the conditions are not met. Double click to adjust width and double click the lower right corner to fill the column. One last logical formula for today is the ifs function. This is a very useful function if you have multiple conditions that lead to multiple results. For example, let's say that there's a dean's list that is available to all students having a GPA of 9 or greater, and then an honorable mention category for those having a GPA between 8 and 9. So in cell X2, we can write a formula that uses the function ifs, plural. The first logical test is the highest GPA category, namely that K2 is greater than or equal to 9, and the output from that condition being met would be the word list, comma. The second logical test would be that the content of cell K2 is greater than or equal to 8. And in that case, the output would be the word mention. The third criterion would be that the content of cell K2 is less than 8. And in that case, the output sadly is, computer says no. So we can copy that all the way down. If we now sort the data, we can check to see that all of the formulas we just made are working. So if we go to cell A1, we can keep tapping Control-Shift right arrow until we've selected all of the headers, all of the columns, and then type Control-Shift down arrow. So now we'll have selected the entire data range plus all of the logical evaluations. And now we can go to the data menu and sort. We can confirm that what we've selected includes headers. We can select the column to sort as GPA. We're going to sort the values of that column, and let's sort from largest to smallest. When we return, we can check our logical tests, and we can see that the logical evaluation of a GPA being greater than 8 worked well. In the multiple criteria columns, we can see that GPA of 8 alone was not enough to be eligible for these fictitious awards. The Women's Award was only available to students showing the value F in column N, and the Canadian Scholarship was only available to citizens or permanent residents. And to be eligible for the local non-arts award, a student had to not be in the arts program. And in the final column, we can see 3 responses based on the 3 categories that we defined in the ifs function: greater than 9, greater than 8, or less than 8.